Part 1, Chapter 15, Agony. The scrape of my feet against the coarse sand and dirt of my driveway echoed in the empty woods. Today had been long, but my mind was active enough to pick out noises that my brain pinged as noteworthy. A rustle of high above branches or an acorn crashing to the forest floor. But nothing auditory held precedence over the visual stimulation I discovered among the shadows. My peripheral vision was wide, warping with my swaying feet. I stopped, my feet locked in place just beside his parked car. My neck twisted in both directions, stiff and creaking. This is the very spot I stood in that dream with Lucy. My first step out of this spiraling circle of thought and potent energy was a stumbling one. Approaching the front door, I felt a keen sense of caution wash over me. My body became tense, preparing to respond in some frightful manner. But as soon as I opened the door and found the house entirely dark, that feeling simultaneously dissipated and densified. The house was deathly quiet, so idle that my very heartbeat shook my ribcage with every thump. My hushed breaths were stifled as I focused on listening, but it would seem the house was listening to me as well. I closed the door behind me, engulfing myself in the container of living shadow. Cautiously, I flipped the light switch, and to my surprise, it worked. The living room was filled with ambient yellow light, and the ceiling fan above slowly began spinning in response. I sighed. My shoes slipped from my feet with hesitant aggression, then I carried my weight across the carpet. I couldn't shake this feeling that the walls had faces, that the very air I was breathing was toxic and consuming me like maggots under my skin. I reached his bedroom door and noticed it was partially open. I lightly pushed it. The hinges creaked loudly and revealed my position. "Dad, you in here?" I whispered into his room. The light from the living room poured in and revealed ruffled sheets on his bed, vacant. My lower lip flexed inward, and I sucked saliva to the back, swallowing it along with the fear. Then, something I can't quite put into words happened. Each hair on my body became rigid all at once. My skin turned cold, and my ears were suddenly stuffed with cotton. Muffled, feeling like I was floating, my heartbeat accelerated and my limbs became heavy. I could hear it, plain as day, the blood coursing through my veins. I focused intently on this violent rush of thick liquid, but became quickly distracted by another sound. This sound was of equal volume, but somehow behind my blood. In the background of the darkness, beneath my very feet, was a frantic mumbling. There were no words I recognized, only lisps and chortles, barely considered verbalizing, and more along the lines of incoherent babble. At that moment, I made a solid fist and smacked myself on the side of the head. This action sent a minor wave of prickly skin tickles throughout my body, and the cotton feeling lessened. The mumble faded into obscurity. Another smack, and my normal state returned. I tried to think about what this experience was, but I couldn't form a thought longer than a few seconds before some itch on my skin pulled me away. My feet carried me out of his room without my will, and I found myself ascending the staircase, unfocused. The headache persisted, except now I was burdened by macabre images of dead children, fire, and rotting flesh. These scenes flashed before my eyes with every blink and left my gut wrenched and balance staggered. From the very moment I returned home, it was like I was thrown into a horror funhouse, contrasting the joyousness I had just left, almost intentionally so. A plot. In the back of my mind I could hear whispers, names, and stories I could not decipher. All of this chaos slowly burning a hole in the back of my skull until I finally reached the top of the stairs and fell to my knees, gasping for air. As I lay hunched, I traced the sensation of icy wet fingers gliding down my spine and throughout my hair. Evil snickering bellowed from the forest beyond these hollow walls and left me feeling trapped in my prison of flesh and bone. I wanted to give in. I wanted to lie on the floor and wait to sink into the depths. This can't be real. Please, just stop. Just stop. I need rest, my limp mouth quietly spit out. It was then that my eyes shut and I fully embraced the darkness. The fingers which glided along my back became coarse, stern. I could feel nails scraping and plucking. My shirt started to get warm, saturated in some unknown fluid, and some indescribable pain took hold of me. It was almost like the entire afternoon at Tansu's house was a dream on the bus ride home. So fragile. And this, all of this, was the construct of an acquainted domicile. A trap set in place for my mental return. Then, against expectation, a new image started to become clear behind my vision. Dusty, torn, and flaking, it was an image of my mother. Her real face, her wonderful gleaming smile, just as I remember, pierced through these negative thoughts, and with it, a word. Stand. I released a shaky breath, cherishing the burning desire growing in my gut, and pressed my palm into the carpet beneath me. With great effort, I lifted myself off the ground, and with that strength, the fingers began to release me. The air around me was thick, yet chilly. I could see past the veil and clearly observe the outline of the railing to my right. My eyes tracked down, and I took a tiresome breath, but from my lips fell a thin wisp of fog, like a wintry exhale, but this fog was black, heavy. A rough cough erupted from my throat as I got up to my feet, ready to surpass this nightmare. In the thick of silence, a metallic clang made itself known. I followed the sound to my bedroom, past the bed, and over to the window. Looking out into the forest proved useless. It wasn't until my eyes lowered to the ground below that I saw it. The bulkhead door was wide open. I waited there, watching the bulk for a minute or more, just reliving that horrible night over and over again. So much has happened, and yet so little has changed. Here I was in the exact same spot, waiting to see that long arm reach up and rip me through this window. Instead, I heard another noise. This sound was much quieter than the last, intentionally so. I only barely managed to hear it behind the intensifying breaths I took, but I knew exactly what it was. The front door opening, then a muffled click. I waited, listening for a few seconds, but found it strange that, though I heard it open, I never heard the door close. I turned myself around only to see that the hallway was pitch black. The living room light had been switched off, and now the house was forfeited to shadows once more. Then a light wooden tap snaked between the walls. A creak, then another. Then a loud creak and pause. I stood with my back to the forest, watching the gap between the door and frame, my shaking eyes focused on the stairwell edge. I froze as I heard another wooden tap. I shifted around the room, danger blaring in my ears while I scanned every inch for a weapon or escape. I partially moved to my left, angling more to be able to barely see the top of the stairs. Something moved. My vision was blurry, less optimized for the dark due to the overwhelming stress I was feeling. From what I could tell, someone was standing at the second step from the top. Part of their face, torso, and hand was outlined. My entire body screamed, begged for me to throw myself through this window to escape, but my heart mellowed the slightest amount, because even though I was cornered and surrounded by mystery, I recognized this aura. How could I not? I've only been around it my whole life. Dad? I churned out. The figure took the final ascending step, and it became clear to me by the outline that it was him. But he moved differently. There was no sway or stupor. It was as if he had complete, euphoric control over his body. Even still, he was slow. One step after the other took seconds to plan, second guess, then follow through. Hey, what's going on? Were you in the basement just now? I asked fearfully. He was quiet, as expected. It took him far too long, but he finally made his way to the foot of my bed and stopped. His posture was slumped, head lowered and shoulders drooping. Paranoia vibrated through the room, and the whispers I had heard on occasion began to slowly rise from the floorboards. An obsessed, babble as quiet as a pine needle falling to the earth below, but somehow audible to me in the most unique way. "Kimberly Ann," he started. My brows lowered, face pensive. "Where have you been?" His voice was monotone and sharply accusative. I took a half step forward, a gesture of peace. "I was at my friend's house, Dad." He didn't respond. "I meant to come home a little sooner, but time got away from us. We were having fun with board games and stuff." He sighed heavily. "Us? Who's us?" he asked with dread in his voice. I awkwardly scratched the side of my head. The feeling in the room was a strange mix of pressurized fear and everyday scolding. "My friend, Tansu. She's a new girl at school that I've been helping out." I tried to keep my answers short and to the point. I looked past him to the door, then to my lamp and back at him, assessing all the risk. "Hey, can I turn on a light? I'm getting a little freaked out in the dark." I lightly scoffed. His head then raised a little. "No, I don't think so. This will all be so much easier if I can't see your face." His words trailed off, and his head lowered again with the last word. What he said made my lower jaw tremble. "What does that mean?" I asked, trying to keep calm, but the whispers were growing, burrowing into the soles of my feet and worming their way out through my nervous system. This whole room was alive, but stagnant. He took a heavy barefoot step toward me, both fists tightly bound by his waist. I retreated, but found my back bumping against the window frame behind me. I had nowhere to go. "You're scaring me," I huffed, sweat building on my chest. He took a large breath and released it with a low, crazed chuckle. "If you can't say yes, then he can't have you." Suddenly, he lunged forward, his left hand reaching out and taking hold of my forearm. I shrieked as his fingers clasped around me, and immediately I started throwing my free fist at him. "Get off!" my voice rebounded. He took my punches to the face and shoulder, but wasn't fazed by my efforts. He then spun me around and strung my own arm across my neck and pinned me to his torso, securing me with his right leg coiling around mine. He then screamed in my ear, but this wasn't a scream of authority like all other times. This was a scream of terror. "Don't fight me, please! Just stop fighting and let me do this!" Still, I struggled. With every ounce of my being, I fought and fought, using my free left hand to slap and punch at anything I could reach. All of it ineffective. This can't be happening. "You son of a bitch! I swear to God, I'll kill you!" my voice wailed. My eyes slammed shut, and I focused on thrashing the best I could, but he wouldn't let me go. Then, without warning, I felt something cold and warm fall on the back of my neck. It dripped and rolled down my shirt one drop at a time. My muscles slowed themselves, but my eyes remained shut. I could hear his whimpering. He was crying. Suddenly, his grip tightened, and his voice became hoarse through the tears. "I was a fool to think it would be so simple, that he would just let us go. No, this is how it has to be," he spoke through grit teeth. With his grip around my arm tightening, so did the pressure in which he held me. My own arm slung across my neck tighter than before, choking me slowly. I could steal a breath or two as I fought to get free, but it wasn't enough. I could feel the swelling of my head as oxygen became less frequent. My eyes squeezed tight, and I fought for every breath. But something strange happened. Behind my lids, I could see a faint glowing light. It was like a fire in the distance, hidden behind a dense fog on a cold winter night. But this light wasn't red or orange. It was purple. I opened my eyes and my room had that same faint shade layered over the black. Using my free arm, I reached up and dug my fingers into his wrist and slid my nails across his forearm, all the way down to the elbow. He screamed in agony as my nails sliced through layers of pulsing flesh. collecting wet, bloody chunks of his skin underneath my anxiously chewed nails. He reared back, releasing me from his grip and grasping his arm. I fell forward, attempting to recover my breath. However, just as I turned myself around to make a run for the door, I was met by a dense fist to the side of my skull. Rolling green hills and a barren blue sky decorated my vision. A wide-open range of short-trimmed grass, accompanied by the smell of a summer's day, had been laid out before me. Standing in the middle of a field, I felt misplaced. Not even the wind accompanied me. The isolation brought happiness and an emotional reprieve. I had no recollection of this place or how I got here, only bliss with the solitude. Now I was looking down at my hand, and I saw my open palm. On impulse, I closed it tight, then opened it again. The folds of skin that were woven around my muscles and bone made it what it was and what I knew it to be. The psychological perception was real enough, but the physical sensation that I should experience was non-existent. I knew then, and smiled. The grass flattened itself out as I began to walk forward, making my way toward a nameless destination. No thoughts in my head, no feeling to overbear me. Complete solace. But out of nowhere, appearing around a corner that wasn't there, I came across a small house. No driveway and no windows. As I was, alone in the wasteland of a field, the grass around the house was tall and dead. A single tree stood falling over. Many discarded leaves adorned the earth in a fiery autumn pattern. I approached the house with confidence. I took up my arm and made a fist to begin knocking. I paused. Just before I made contact with the door, a knock came from the other side. Self-preservation fled my bones, and I reached for the handle. When I opened the door, I found the room to be filled with some strange liquid. However, the liquid did not spill or become disturbed by the opening of the door in any way. Hesitant, I looked behind me once more, then inserted my index finger into the pool. I was then ripped from where I stood, sucked directly into slow-spinning water, and spun in a half-circle. Once inside the water, I found that breathing was not impossible, but it wasn't the same as taking a breath. This pool vitalized me in a way that I couldn't grasp or explain to another living being. It was murky, brown, and full of thick bubbles, all rushing to the surface that didn't exist. It was hard to see with my regular eyes, but that issue was quickly remedied when that hazy purple filter slid over my vision. The water and its depth were hard to see through my regular eyes, but that issue was quickly remedied when that hazy purple filter slid over my vision. The more I floated around, the more I understood the limits of its space. Oddly enough, attached to nothing were a few metal boxes above. One was open on the bottom and dripped a whitish-blue, algae-looking substance. I felt drawn to the color, but at the same time, revolted by it. A shattered glass feeling in my chest pulled my eyes away from the boxes, and I redirected them towards the limitless floor below. I stared into the abyss, unable to move or think. Suffocated by walls of a dark windowless house. Below me, I suddenly saw lights. 2 at first, then 6, and then 20, all igniting up 2 at a time, each of them bearing a bright purple glow. It was at that moment that I started to drown.